together with our
Sorry.
Yes, we are all recorded now. That's fine. Together with our partners from FTI, one of the largest and successful consulting and lobbying organization at the EU level and international level. But today we will have a pleasure to speak and discuss regulations, initiatives, best practices, reality and experience from Brussels office of FTI Consulting. And the major speaker today will be Kirsten Dume. She's the senior managing director responsible for energy, industrials. Also, we have Mateusz Stankiewicz-Zinka and Olga Belkova. Lots of you know Olga very well from our collaboration with her in Kiev. So, Karsten, the floor is yours. Please present FTI a little bit for our audience, and then we may move forward with regard to lobbying advocacy at the EU level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Svetlana, and hello, everybody. Hello from Brussels. So, thanks for the kind introduction. We are very happy to have this session with you. We have 90 minutes altogether, as mentioned. Unfortunately, I have to step out at 12 because I'll be traveling to Istanbul. Very briefly about myself, Kirsten Dume. I'm a German national. I've been with the company for 21 years. I have a political background. I worked for the German Greens in the parliament, in the German parliament, in the European Parliament before I then became a consultant. And yeah, head energy industrials. I'm responsible for ESG and sustainability. And I also represent FTI Consulting in the board of IPACA. I was just re-elected, but for full transparency with no opponent. So it wasn't that difficult. That is the trade association for the public affairs agencies that, you know, developed code of conduct and things we will later on speak about. Mateusz, you want to say a couple of words?
Yes,
please?
2 words. Mateusz Stankiewicz-Zinka, Polish national, 10 years with FTI here in Brussels, working in Kirsten's team, mainly focusing on oil and gas advocacy projects in terms of public affairs here in Brussels. And before that, I worked for Chevron in Central Eastern Europe, which involved also Ukraine as part of the one of the key markets. Pleasure meeting you all.
Okay, I guess it's me now. It's Olga Belkova. Some of you may know me from my political career in Ukraine, but now I have joined FTI Consulting in Brussels because I want to help Ukrainian companies to make sure that their voice is being heard in Brussels.
We're very happy to have Olga on board. So very amazing energy she brings. Thanks a lot. Right, shall we move on then? Very briefly about our company, FTI Consulting. We are a global business advisory. We are listed at the New York Stock Exchange, so a US company, but globally 8,000 people approximately, as you can see here, in 31 countries around the globe, in all the key markets, mainly all the key capital markets. Where we don't have own offices, we have a close network of so-called affiliates. What maybe just very briefly differentiates us with our competitors here in Brussels, the other public affairs agencies, and that's why we call ourselves a business advisory firm. We have actually 5 segments who very closely work together, and these are economic consulting, corporate finance, forensics and litigation, technology, and where we sit here in Brussels, strategic communications. Strategic communications means everything around bread and butter lobbying, public affairs, government relations, but also everything around communications, corporate reputation matters, profiling, crisis communications, merger and acquisition communications. So this in a nutshell at us. In Brussels, we are around 130 people here. And in the energy and industrials team, we are around, I think, 21 people now in my team. So just to give you a little bit of an idea who we are, we do have an affiliate in the Ukraine also in the past where we worked together And yeah, hopefully we can pick up on that and do more together. This is just a little bit about the agenda. So what I understood, you are really interested, in the reporting, the transparency side of things. So the overview of the EU decision-making process, I will take you through very, very quickly. But I would like to invite you again, if you have questions, don't wait until the end. Use the chat and step in. We always keep an eye on it. If there are any questions or you would like further information or didn't understand something, if I wasn't very clear, so please raise your hand and come in. Okay, we just give you a very quick overview of Brussels, which is a crowded space, why it is so important, to be active and do it in a smart way if you want to be heard. We have around 40,000 EU officials. People always say it's such a bureaucracy, but actually, if you think about 40,000 people for 27 member states and the relations to international organizations, it's not very much at all. We have currently 700 members of the European Parliament. Elections are coming up. And we have around 1,000 accredited EU journalists. Brussels used to be the biggest press score. We are now second after Washington, D.C. We have about 150 professional services firms and law firms, so companies like ours and law firms who also do a lot of lobbying, by the way. And then between 15,000, 20,000 lobbyists, and lobbyists also here are counted also the lobbyists from corporates who, of course, have their own people, trade associations, 700, which is huge, chambers of commerce from different countries, diplomatic missions, and then very important also NGOs, interest groups. I would add think tanks. We have some very, very powerful think tanks here, academia. So this is just a little bit the overview of the crowded space, the institutions. We have the European Commission, we come to that in a moment, the Parliament, the Council of the European Union, not to be exchanged with the European Council. These are when the member states, when the head of member states come together to meet to really discuss, crises or political directions, just to give you the overview. And again, very briefly, the political calendar, as I mentioned, this legislative period comes to an end. Beginning of June, we have the elections. It's 1 week of elections, actually, because different member states have different timing. It's a 5-year legislative cycle. In the second half of the year, then also the Commission will be newly decided upon. That means member states will send 1 commissioner per country. As you can imagine, that's quite competitive. Everybody wants to have the important jobs. And it will also be decided if there might be some new jobs coming up and a reshuffle of what has been done right now. We have a situation at the moment, the last legislative period was really all focused on the European Green Deal. We've seen around 50 legislative pieces just coming out of that. There was an enormous push. The European Commission has never agreed and never worked so hard on these things as ever before. Now is the time, with everything that's happening in the world, the Ukraine war, but also the trade war between China and the US. The EU is very, very worried of falling behind. So we can see now already that the next political agenda will focus much more on strategic autonomy, competitiveness, industry, policy, and that I'm not saying that there will a backlash, but there will, let's say, maybe a more pragmatic position on the European Green Deal and green legislations, and it will be more looked jointly with industrial policy. Also because we can expect what the polls are showing that unfortunately the extreme right will probably raise more in Europe, and they do not have the green agenda on their horizon. But as we also say here, the 2050 climate neutrality target remains. It's just a question, how do we get there? Is this more about, innovation, coming up with solutions, technology, involving industry in finding these solutions, or is it more, from the more green perspective, avoiding things, putting stops to certain things? So this will be highly disputed. On the right, we don't need to go through that. You see a little bit the agenda that we are facing. It will be a highly political year. The election of the president of the European Commission is already, starting. Von der Leyen is on top of the list, but there are also some member states that are not very happy with her re-election. Let's see. And then, as I mentioned already, the commissioners, they will set the tone for the next 5 years. This is a period where many organizations and corporates start looking at how do I fit in all of this? Where and how can I position myself and be heard? And, this masses of lobbyists and organizations. So a lot of the corporate world we are working with right now is developing kind of their own manifesto. What do you want to be known for the next 5 years? Where will be your champions? Where do you want to position yourselves and find policymakers and regulators that you can build a relationship and that will enhance your path and help to achieve your objectives? So it's a very, even if we stopped at the moment and don't have legislative work going on, it's highly political and it's all about positioning. If we go to the next slide, please. Very shortly, the European Commission is so important because they are the ones that come up with the new legislation. It's the only body that can suggest new legislation. Of course, there's discussion beforehand, there are societal debates, and already beforehand, all of the different stakeholders can also suggest legislation or changes to existing legislation, but it's only the Commission who actually then can come up with a proposal. We have the consultation processes where then the other bodies get involved, the European Parliament, the committee that is responsible for that respective file, the Council, they need to find agreement. It has become much more streamlined in the past. When I started 20 years ago, we would often go in so-called third reading. This practically doesn't happen anymore. It's much more, it's in everybody's interest to have a much quicker process as things are already very complicated in the EU. But this also means for the corporate world that it's sometimes more difficult to get involved into the process, could be less transparent, more decisions taking, behind closed doors. So a very good understanding of the processes and the different players becomes more and more important. I don't know if we want to really, no, I don't think exactly. We share this presentation. Yes. I don't think we go into the details, but here you just see that it is a quite difficult process, and if you want to be active here, you should be aware of that process. And just one thing I would mention is that it's important to know when to engage and at what level you want to engage, when you want to be more at the technical level and when you want to bring the most senior people to discuss with the political level at Brussels. So that is always very important, and to build a strategy from the outset that reflects that.
Right.
Over to Mateusz.
Absolutely. I'll go very briefly through.
Let's just one stop. No questions. No questions. Sorry.
No worries. Yes, I'll go very briefly to the three institutions just to give a couple of highlights. As Kirsten mentioned, the Commission is the only body that can come up with legislation, although the member states provide political signals. This is the structure, so this is the political structure of the European Commission. We can think of a government of the 27 member states that have the interests of the whole EU as such in front of them. And not all commissioners have the same political weight. You see, the vice presidents, they're also only simple commissioners, as I can simplify that way. And this is a balance between having the common European agenda as such, whereas also balancing out the national context. So, a bad example I would give is the Polish Agriculture Commissioner, who neither managed to balance out the European versus also the Polish context in terms of issues related to agriculture. So it is a struggle. It has been influenced from both ends. Maybe just to mention, forward-looking, we expect, as Kirsten mentioned, new legislature happening as of June. More industrial policy, defense. These will be, as well as enlargement. These three portfolios we expect to gain of importance and have perhaps even a dedicated, political figure, a vice president. And it's just, maybe just also too important to mention that besides this political level, there's the whole working level. So, director generals, it's called so-called ministries, whether it comes from when it comes to different issue areas from energy, transport, climate, internal market, which work then on implementing the vision, the ideas that come from this body, this called College of Commissioners, and who are functionaries who stay regardless of the political cycle and can change perhaps responsibilities, but they are not politically appointed. Maybe just 2 points in terms of engaging with the Commission and having some key points in mind. It's an issue is never dealt by one ministry or by one DG, so it's important to understand who is also involved in terms of the final outcome. Positive messages, solutions-oriented, looking at also the agenda that is happening, that is currently at the political level. What is the contribution of industry? What is the contribution of the company it can bring to the discussion? And persistence. It's not a one-off in terms of advocacy. It is whether we're having meetings on a very technical level, or dealing with the issue before involving more high-level, more political stakeholders on the respective issue. That's matching the seniority level. That's an important element. And sometimes, more from a perspective of European companies, the national connections as well are helping. Perhaps, unless there are any questions or comments,
No.
If not, maybe 2 words on the European Parliament. As Kirsten mentioned, is the co-decision body in terms of legislation. It is very important for putting political pressure, for debates, events, for non-binding resolutions. So basically presenting views and opinions that can then steer the political discussions and put pressure, whether on the Commission, but also on member states. It's important here is often the national link that matters as well, or industry that is engaging with the European Parliament, looking at the connections, whereas the MPs are representatives of each country. So also looking at how to best position themselves. They're usually more accessible in terms of having meetings, having engagements, or whether participating in events or being open to write a question to a commission on a particular topic that really is relevant for a specific industry or a specific company. And that's also an opportunity for profiling. So looking also at the next 5 years and influx of new people, we expect about 50% of the House will be with new MEPs who will be looking to specialize, to become active on a specific topic or area. So that's also an opportunity for engagement, an opportunity for cooperation. Maybe just 1 point, Kirsten mentioned the projections already. I will not go into details, but of course we'll share the presentation later on. I think 3 points to make here. Yes, there's still a strong democratic core, that the mainstream core that will cooperate together, although the far right or the right wing of the political spectrum is gaining of interest and power. And economy and social issues will be at the forefront. So that's something that we can expect also to be more visible in the debates in the next 5 years. The last point, perhaps in terms of engaging, as I mentioned, each MEP will specialize or is specializing in a topic or in a committee represented in the parliament, also within its own national delegation. So if you have 2 MEPs, within one committee, one of them might be not as much interested in the topic because there's already another person who is politically in the lead of that topic. So that's important in terms of making sure to talk to the right person. I think also another point that is worth underscoring is the assistance. So the doers, the openers in terms of the issues, not only to look at the engagement at the political level, of course, between the MEP and industry representative, but also on a working level. That very often helps to prepare the later on engagement to make sure there is no disappointment in managing also expectations on both ends. I know I'm racing, but happy, of course, to take any question or any comment. Perhaps then talking a few points on the Council. Yes, the Commission can initiate policy proposals, but the Council, the Member States, they set the guidelines. They can provide pressure. They can provide its views that then the Commission would be, in a way, forced to come up with legislative proposals that then would be discussed together with the European Parliament, but also with national governments. It's worth mentioning the presidency, so the leading member state that has for 6 months is chairing the discussions across the spectrum, whether it's on geopolitics, whether it's on specific policy issues. That is very much a solution finder between the different views and opinions.
Maybe just one comment. It will be very interesting, as you probably all know, as of 1st of July, Hungary will take over, which is, let's say, how do you say in English? Unser Sorgenkind, our worrying child, in many respects, also, the closeness to Russia, China, etc. So that will be a very interesting 6 months. There was even a debate, just to share, if we wouldn't have the Hungarian representation, but overstep that, but that would have been probably a too difficult decision. So we're all looking forward to how this will be rolled out. Could also maybe be that it disciplines Hungary in a way, because they should take a more, exactly as Matthias said, facilitating role, but it will be definitely an unusual one. So let's see.
But thankfully we have Poland afterwards, so
yes, and then everything will be fine.
Of course, joking. But yes, here as well, looking at the Council, one hand it is a political steer, but also there is a working level. Each member state has its own mission, embassy. It's called permanent representation here in Brussels, and also staffed according to the different topics, whether political or issue areas, which then are important when it comes to engaging, to advocacy on specific legislative files. Each permanent representation, so each representation here in Brussels is different. Some of them are more active, more influential, whereas others are more of a transmission, provide a more transmission function back to the capital. So that very much depends on the member states, and that needs also to be taken into consideration when engaging and discussing issues with each country. And also, last point, I think worth mentioning, particular thinking about Ukraine, coalition building. So there are more natural coalitions, whether it's the Nordics, whether it's the Baltics, whether it's the Visegrad group. Perhaps Hungary is a special case currently, but also thinking on advocacy and engaging on issues. Who else would be willing to pick up the topic, or who else could support me and on a particular issue in terms of member state? And there are natural allies. Also, the discussions, for example, on increasing EU's budgets and national spendings, We have the frugal countries, led by the Netherlands, for example, but then also we have member states that are more willing to put into the common budget for a greater good. So these are perhaps seen technicalities, but very relevant once there is advocacy on particular issues or legislative files. That's it in terms of the three institutions.
Great. Thanks, Mateusz. We then come to the EU Transparency Register and Ethical Lobbying. We go to the next slide. So it's been quite a journey on this, and I've been pretty much involved from the very beginning. Lobbying was a dirty word in Brussels. It was seen as something negative, behind closed doors. It really comes, before the times of internet. Lobbying was really that, lobbyists were waiting in the lobby to speak to policymakers and have a conversation with them to have an impact. So it was actually a process, on one hand, very much criticized for not being transparent, but on the other hand, also acknowledging that the conversation with corporates, with firms like ours, with lobbyists, is actually helping the process, helping to find the best solutions, and it's part of democracy. So ultimately, nobody questioned that this has to happen, though from some more radical NGOs, there will always be criticism. I think the biggest one to mention here is EU Observer, right? Corporate Observer. They always publish their report once a year, and we are also as a company always negatively mentioned, but because everybody knows they are so outside of everything else, it doesn't really have any impact. But so what I'm saying is the corporate world, from the pretty much the outset, the majority anyway, had a big interest of establishing a transparency register, because we thought, we have nothing to hide from, and we want to be transparent, and we want to show that our work is valuable, necessary even, because corporates bring the expertise, they have the specialists, and from the experience from our work, particularly the Commission is looking to this technical expertise because they don't have that. It's absolutely crucial that there is a collaboration. So the Transparency Register started smaller. Over the years, it has evolved, and it's of course represented at the EU level, and it's applicable to everybody, even if it's an American company, Ukrainian company, that is active in the EU and that is actively engaging with policymakers or targeting policymakers with messaging. When we started, it was really only focused at public affairs, government relations activities, but it's been broadened. Also communications is part of it now. If with these, we call it political communications, is used to target policymakers. For example, we develop a social media program for a client. All of the MEPs are on social media. They have their own accounts. So that is also something that needs to be declared on the EU Transparency Register. And another general comment I would like to make is that the EU is a role model for many member states. So we can see now the EU was the first one to come up with this. And we can see now that more and more member states develop their own transparency registers. Some of them go even further than others. But so it's definitely a path the EU created that will take on a national level. I see there's a question.
Yeah.
So it's what is the difference between NGO and business professional association?
A good question. They're both non-for-profit. So absolutely, when we speak about NGO, and it's a good question, we mean more, for example, environmental non-profit organizations like Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, but also in other, Amnesty International. We have a big consumer organization, Berg. That is for us more the NGO type of thing. Doesn't have to be only environmental, as I said, could be social, you know, women's rights, whatever it is. And then we have, we call them trade associations, the business associations, but you are right, they're also non-for-profit. But of course, the trade associations are seen more as the, you know, the spokes platform, let's say, for corporates, whereas the NGO are non-corporate, issue-based, exactly. Many of the, let's say, more pragmatic NGOs, they do work together with corporates on particular projects, on particular themes. That is possible. And again, some of them are very well respected also by corporates. Some of them are maybe a bit more radical, not very pragmatic. So again, you know, whenever you want to get involved, that is really, I think, one of the key issues is a detailed mapping of all the different players you are facing. But yeah, thanks, good clarifying question. I should mention here also law firms. That is an interesting one also. Also law firms need to register, but only their public affairs activities. Everything else, for example, merger and acquisition, state aid, all of these things that are highly confidential, obviously will not be added into a public transparency register. There was a question again. Yes, how do you report the meetings? Yes, I think we come to that. We have a slide. Thanks for the questions. Yes. If we move on. So this is one example. I don't know if you can read. So this is one example of the register. If you give in Google EU Transparency Register, it pops up immediately. And we have to do it, we as a business advisory firm and our clients, the corporate world, also have to do it. And that is one thing for us, very important. We have to be aligned with our clients. And interestingly, we often have a, you know, we take this very seriously, and we often need to convince our clients to follow our example of transparency, because clients still worried, not all of them, but some of them still worry, oh, if I put in, I do 500,000, let's say, for example, lobbying activities, that this will be, that this will have a negative impact, or that they will be penalized for that. And we always argue with them, no, the contrary is the case. It's fundamentally important to be transparent about what you are doing. And on the right side, you can see what we are, what is ultimately important is who's behind it, the name of the company, your registration, but also we have to list the individuals within our company who are doing this. And this is, by the way, also linked. Individual lobbyists like us, we can apply for a pass to the European Parliament. You still have to register when you walk in, but it's just a much quicker and less burdensome process as if you wouldn't have a pass. You need to very clearly state what you are working on. But this, you know, the detail is, for example, I don't know, we work on the circular economy, and here particularly that was a very big law that kept us busy over the last years. For example, the packaging and packaging waste regulation. So you should spell it out like that. This is a piece of legislation we're very actively involved in. And then you have a scope of budget. You don't have to say, you know, it's, I spent 343,000, but there is always a scope. 10 to 50,000, etc. It goes up, and you should have, you know, absolutely an honest approach to these brackets. You you don't need to go into any further content detail. That is not required. It's really the issue you are working on, the piece of legislation you are working on, or the sector, the industry sector, you know, you represent and want to get involved in. I think this is very important if you work with others on this, that you are aligned, because as I said, there is one NGO particularly, but also journalists use the transparency register. And if they find there is, you know, discrepancy between, you know, different companies working on the same thing, they start asking questions. So we always tell everybody, be aligned, be honest, do the right thing. And it actually, it's a rather quick task. It's not, you know, people always say, oh, it's so burdensome. No, it's not. It's, and once you've done it, that's the other thing, very important. You have to update it regularly. And meanwhile, we even get proactive emails from the institutions to remind us that, you know, we have an update, we haven't updated for 1 year, and we have one dedicated person in the office who is helping us to ensure that we as a company have updated all of our files that we are working on. And of course, the bigger your organization is, and the more files you work on, the more burdensome. But once you have done it, and once you are in, it's a very easy, an easy task. Svetlana.
Yes, if I may, pretty technical issue, but this question we received from our companies due to the upcoming new regulation on lobbying in Ukraine. When it comes to the list of registered lobbyists in the transparency registry, it's obvious that you have your company's representatives as professional lobbyists, but when it comes to one single company, for instance, the CEO, who speaks on behalf of his company, who publicly provide interviews with journalists addressing messages to some political issues or advocating the issue and the policy regulation, which is he and his company is interested in. Should he be registered as a lobbyist in the transparency registry, or it's not regulated?
If he or she speaks and meets with EU policy makers, regulators, he or she should be.
Even, for instance, being a member of some trade union, business association, because they quite often arrange some meetings, giving the floor to their members, for instance, CEOs of their member companies, he or she should also be registered in the. Okay.
Exactly. And there's one, that's a very good question. There is one very important reason for that, that in the Commission above directors level, they will not meet with you if you are not registered in the transparency register. Doesn't matter if you are with a trade association, but this person is the CEO of a company, and that needs then to be registered. In the parliament, it's not as strict, but for example, depending on which MEP you meet, again, this MEP makes it usually public on their website that they say, I'm not meeting with anybody who is not registered. And a lot of the MEPs, not only that they demand that you're registered, they will then report about the meeting on their website. So there's really a whole new step forward. And actually, if you want to have an impact, it's very simple in Brussels. If you're not registered, it's impossible, really.
Should we also mention the Qatar gate that also increased the unlawful behaviors of some of the members of the European Parliament? It triggered additional discussions and actually house rules for engaging in lobbying members of the European Parliament. So, for example, in the past,
MEPs took money from Qatar.
So,
very simple, and very,
And for example, in the past, meeting MEP assistants, for example, not on the premises of the European Parliament, but in a coffee place around, was not required to be reported. Whereas now they're expanding also these requirements, so it doesn't matter unless you bump into someone during you're flying, at the airport, for example, or at a conference. This is not required to be registered. But if you're having a meeting, a scheduled one, a planned one, this needs by rule to be reported.
Even if it's outside the parliament.
Absolutely.
And that's new, exactly.
Yeah.
And also for the commission, for example, I have next Friday, I meet the head of the cabinet of the trade commissioner, Dombrovski. I will meet with Michael Hager. And before, they have an extra special registry I have to fill in with my national ID number, etc., 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 before I then go and into the building and have a coffee with them. So it all sounds quite burdensome, but it's actually, from a technology point of view, it gets quicker and quicker. But yes, you should be mindful about that, because otherwise some meetings will not happen if you don't comply with the rules. Are there any more questions in the chat? I can't see the questions.
No, not new.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you shared the code of conduct.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. If we go to the next slide, then. Yes, I mean, I think we spoke about this already, more or less. And maybe I think what is interesting to give a couple of examples. So Qatargate was when MEPs, weren't transparent. And this will, by the way, as we said already before, that we expect more extreme rights come in. We currently have the situation, very sad. As I said, I'm German, from the extreme right / fascist AfD. Their lead candidate for the European Parliament, his assistant, apparently, I have to say, still at this stage, has been spying for China, and the number 2 of their list has taken money from Russia. It's incredible, and now they search the offices, and let's see what will come out of that. But they're still on the list, immunity, and they're not yet, it's not yet 100% proven, but so there's lots going on, and the institutions are also worried that maybe not so much from a corporate side at the moment, but the next legislative period, with having all these very dubious people in the parliament, that from that side it could be quite challenged. So they want to do everything they can now to put things in place they have to adhere to. So it'll be an interesting time. And here we just have a couple of examples. I think the Amazon is always a very interesting example. So the Amazon badges, thank you, Mateusz. It was about a political issue about the workers' rights at Amazon, and the commission, no, it was the commission or the parliament who wanted to meet with them? It was the parliament, right? Not the commission. They wanted to meet with them and had invited Amazon to discuss the situation of the workers at Amazon. And Amazon didn't show up for the meetings. And then the parliament said that is absolutely disrespectful behavior. You lobby us otherwise, you don't respond in an appropriate way, we ban you. And they actually banned. Amazon, for the time being, is banned from the European Parliament, and only in the next legislative period the Parliament can reconsider. So that was probably one of the biggest cases. The Monsanto papers, that was also very interesting. We were on the side involved in that. So it was all around the herbicide glyphosate. These papers were questioned if they were based on scientific research and regulatory processes. So there was also MEPs that said we will not meet with Monsanto anymore. Companies working for Monsanto were also in the target because we have very strict GDPR rules. So, you know, about that means how we deal with information about individual policymakers, etc., etc. And apparently the agency that worked for Monsanto had a long list of policymakers, including private information. That, by the way, is also super important to keep in mind. Keeping these lists, keeping this information is illegal in the EU. So I can have, you know, MEP XYZ and the phone number and what he's officially working on and the address, but I couldn't keep information like he doesn't like us or he's a friend of ours or whatever. This information is illegal to keep in any document. So that was another case. We had one case, we worked for ExxonMobil, and that was also very interesting. It was very differently. It was years ago, we worked on shale gas when there is no shale gas exploration in Europe. And there was no law around shale gas, but there was a lot of discussion around shale gas because in the US, you had the shale gas bonanza. And there was a documentary done by an NGO, and it was the very famous, it was against shale gas, and a very famous scene where somebody turns on the water tap and burning water comes out of the tap. And this caused so much hysteria. And then the this documentary, this filmmaker came to Brussels, was invited by the European Parliament. The US documentary was shown here, and then the Parliament more or less decided, oh my God, this is work of the devil. We have to stop this even before any exploration or anything happens. We worked on that to try to balance the debate. And ExxonMobil was then pulled into this, was accused of being a climate change denier, because way back in the past, there were indeed some comments by senior corporates of ExxonMobil, and they tried to ban ExxonMobil from the parliament. And we worked on that, and we actually could prevent that because there was no evidence, no base on that. So, but just giving you these different examples, how important it is to do the right thing. And yes, sometimes the parliament can be very unreasonable. Our advice then always is provide the data, show you're a good corporate citizen, you know, and then usually they also come to an overall reasonable agreement. If we go to the next slide, please. Oh, yeah, I think that was it. If there are no more questions, Olga, then over to you.
I do think you have still like 10 minutes. So if there are some questions to Kirsten in particular, let's use them.
If I may, to use this opportunity again, Kirsten, according to your experience working in this landscape of Brussels bubble and different organizations, what is the most, from your perspective, efficient way for a single company to protect their legitimate interests? Would it be either through these organizations like Business Europe, or some trade unions, industrial associations? There's also, if I understood correctly, the triangle of social dialogue between the authorities and business community, for instance, within the European Economic and Social Committee, and or in particular employers group, or using, you know, these kind of companies like yours, for instance, private consulting companies?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, of course, we're the best. No, but in all seriousness, it's, again, a very good question, because it's really interesting. Things in Brussels are also fluid, right? And at the moment, I think I can say, maybe except Hydrogen Europe, trade associations are often quite criticized. Maybe Eurogas, also a good one, for being very slow. It's the nature of their setting up, right? So it's the smallest common denominator. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And so to move things forward, is sometimes more difficult for them. It's still important to be part of them because you want to be represented, as a sector. And, we typically always advise clients to do both. You use us more for your very individual corporate objectives. We can act quicker, more creative, whereas being part of a trade association is important to be, for some issues, aligned. There will always be issues that are better tackled at the sector level. And then you have other issues in your company where you differentiate from your other sector friends and where you need to go alone. And I think that's where we come in. In trade associations, it's also important to be part of it. Sometimes you just want to take a back role because you want to know what the others are doing. In some trade associations, maybe you even want to take a leading role because you want to impact, you have the resources to do that. And it's a profiling opportunity also. And then there's a third one where we also advise clients very, very often. More and more in Brussels, you have the situation where corporates come together with like-minded corporates that could be in your sector, but also in your supply chain maybe, that gives you more oomph, let's say, because it really depends. At commission level, they like getting a view of more companies than just one. For them, it's important. They don't want to be seen to just be dealing with one company. Again, that could backfire on them. So they like to have a broader view, be it a trade association or be it a platform, some kind of coalition. At MEP level, it's slightly different because the MEPs, they also have national interest at the end of the day. So, they like, of course, to work closely with corporates from their member states, constituencies even. But I think, if you work with an agency like ours, you can drive much more your concrete commercial objectives.
Talking about commercial, there's a question in the chat about
money,
fee structures.
Oh dear.
Typical fee structures and their arrangements.
So we have the way, I guess, main companies like ours work like that. We have hourly rates according to our seniority. So I'm more important than Mateusz. He's an MD. So the second, we have senior managing directors, senior directors, senior consultants, and consultants. That's our structure. And on each level, we have different fees. Based on these fees, we calculate what the work would take, what the company has, what the money, the budget is that is available. And then we calculate based on that, we review the work we do. There's always also an upfront investment, of course, because we need to get to know the company. We need to learn more about the issue. But then ultimately, of course, we have an interest to work in a fair way, let's say, that we get paid for the work fairly, but that also the clients get the absolute best from us. And that's how we work. We use experts from this office, but we also pull in experts from other offices, because that was one point maybe we didn't mention enough. Member states play a huge role in Brussels, because member states, of course, also drive their political agenda through Brussels. So we work very, very closely, basically on all of the mandates nowadays, with our colleagues in the capitals.
I think there was a specific question about the success fee.
That's a very good question. Our CEO would like that, because he just told us we don't work enough with success fees. Success fees we do typically on, we had a couple of arbitration cases where we worked with success fees, or M&As. In our work, we don't do it so often, but that's really something we've been asked by our leadership also, maybe to be more creative around that. So good question. We do it sometimes, maybe not enough. Yeah.
Okay, should we move to the next part? And thank you, Kirsten, for joining us.
Thank you
Yes,
so
I think
much. That was
will-
really very interesting and insightful. Thank you indeed, and very important for us to understand the regulation spectrum, and your cases are just amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, and I apologize that I have to leave, and you know, any more questions you can also put them in writing, or
Yeah, we're giving all the emails. So.
exactly. And yeah, we're very committed to Ukraine in this office, so I hope, you know, there will be moments where we can work together. Thank you all very much for your attention, and
Thank you.
have a
Thank
great,
you.
great
Bye,
day.
Kirsten.
Bye. Thanks, Olga. Thanks, Matteo.
Thank you. Yeah, so I will continue with just trying to bring to your attention few issues that I think as a Ukrainian might be of interest to you in, you know, in understanding Brussels. So why would you care about Brussels? We are in an awkward situation right now because we are just a candidate. Our government is dealing with the governments, you know, from member states and Brussels at large as a European Union, where we are as companies in all of this. So I would summarize and say, like, it's either you really need Europe to help you with something, be it funding, partnerships, or generating new ideas, innovation, etc., or you struggle because something is happening in Brussels. It could be because Brussels is developing some of the regulations which will be part of Ukrainian regulations very soon, and Green Deal in particular is one such direction where we see a lot of it happening, or because you are trading in Europe and regardless of Ukrainian membership, you are already under the rules which are present in European Union. So, but as you think about it, I always recommend companies here, unless you are unique, and like to give you unique companies in Ukraine, they would be Ukrenergo, they would be gas transmission system operator, or Naftogaz. They virtually don't have like the two first, they are TSOs, transmission system operators. They are unique on Ukrainian market, and they are unique in terms of Brussels understanding of Ukrainian market. So naturally, back to your question, Svetlana, of course, for them, they can have a standalone campaign. But me, when I worked with gas TSO of Ukraine, I worked with FTI as a client because I knew that, you know, even as smart as I am, I don't have enough of connections. I don't have enough of understanding. That's why I engaged with FTI. But we were also present at different associations because we knew that sometimes our interests were in alignment with other companies. So when you think about Brussels, you have to understand that unfortunately for us, unlike in Ukraine, you cannot come to somebody here and impose your agenda. There are two issues which of course are understood from everyone, Commission, Parliament, Council of Europe, about Ukraine. There is war in Ukraine. You should not repeat. Everyone is aware. You know, they understand. They they reflect on it, and they are willing to help. But the rest of issues, can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah, the rest of issues is their agenda, and you cannot change it, and you have to fit into this agenda. You cannot like just say in Ukraine we are, we are working on that. No. They are working on ESG and sustainability, and unless you talk about it, you will not get high-level meeting with the commissioner. You have to understand that they are going through some changes, and you have to acknowledge that you cannot come to somebody who is leaving the office and ask them to do the last, evening gift to you by, changing something. They will not do it. There is a lot of political uncertainty right now. It's because of, the different views on climate change, sustainability, but also this left and right movements being, rebalanced right now. And what we see right now is that social inclusiveness and just transition is becoming more prevalent. And here I think Ukraine has better chances of using some of our arguments. We can go later. So when you come to Brussels, you have to assume they know something about Ukraine, not to the extent you want them to know about Ukraine and Ukrainian companies and your particular problems, but they are willing to help. You don't have to kind of argue with them. You just have to explain what is your pain points or your idea for their support, and listen carefully if they can do what you are asking them to do. Support for Ukraine is here. Yes, everyone willing to help, but it's not like automatic, because people you are talking to, they are officials of their own countries or European Union. They are not our officials. They don't owe us anything. So it is our job to actually find arguments to make them cooperative. Here in Europe, and it's very hard to understand for somebody who has been lobbying in Ukraine, politicians never go beyond their mandate, their current mandate. If you come to parliament, don't expect them to initiate major legislation. They are not doing it. It's not their mandate. So even if you want to suggest some ideas, you may hear their appreciation and their recognition of how creative you are, but they are not registering new law like our MPs would do, like in Ukraine. So you just have to understand and don't waste their time, and don't get too excited about them smiling to you when they say like, oh, that's a great idea, but they are not gonna do it for you. In Ukrainian context, you have to understand that for most of the companies, European Commission and Council of EU are the most important institutions. Typically, they work with our government, but on a case-by-case basis, they also may work with companies. As I said, like some of the energy companies in particular, because of what is the situation in Ukraine, I saw some of the commission members and officials being willing to help with our companies to understand what is happening on the ground and what is a realistic way of helping us. So just keep it in mind. We can go to the next one. The process. I cannot stress the difference between Ukraine and Europe is that everything is extremely slow compared to Ukraine. Nobody is registering overnight the law, passing it first reading next week, and in 2 weeks you have a new law. It's not happening. Even for Ukraine, even when there is a political will to help Ukraine, it goes through the due process. Because of that, unfortunately, when you come to Brussels, don't hope that 1 or 2 meetings with Parliament, Commission, and somebody from the Council, you put a tick on your notes and you think, okay, done. No, it's 30 months of approval process, and you have to keep your eye on each and every stage. Unfortunately, that is true for all major interests. I don't know many cases of successful lobbying on behalf of Ukrainian companies, but I just happen to be a part of one. When we made change into legislative piece on the gas market, when the war started, we were actually able, as a gas TSO of Ukraine, suggest an idea which was aligned with Naftogaz, with the government, with Energy Community Secretariat, and we had a little addition to the existing process, which was happening, for 20 months by that time, to add Ukrainian storages as a legitimate destination for European companies to store their gas in Ukraine. That's one of the unprecedented cases where events, people, ideas came to a point like one puzzle, and it worked out. But usually it takes about a year to develop idea, build coalition, bring governments together, explain it to everyone who needs to be, explained, who needs to get these explanations, and push through the process. Then we spent on transparency. I was always, very proud to say that I come from such and such company. I do such and such, work in Ukraine. Here are our national interests, and never forget, each of the companies from Ukraine, we do have national interests. And here is how we see them being, of impact or of interest to Europe or a particular, country, be it Poland or Hungary. We explain it very transparently. And usually you have very high level of understanding, appreciation of your honesty and sympathy, coming towards our interests. That is to say that we have to be, don't do like a shady, talks in the lobbies, but participate actively in all the public discussions. And I'm sure, appreciation will be great. As we said, some of the rules which are developing in Europe right now, for example, CBAM, it's a purely, a European idea, but, it will have tremendous impact on most of the companies which are, subject to CBAM in Ukraine. In fact, Ukraine was, analyzed as the most kind of impacted country from all the third countries around Europe because of the norms of CBAM. But what I see right now, politicians here are interested in understanding peculiarities and details, factual details about how companies are getting ready, what is working, what is not working. And I do see an opportunity to influence them in their secondary legislation, in their rules, to accommodate for the difficulties that probably Ukrainian companies are facing with, for example, preparation for CBAM. Let's go further. I think we are done with what we wanted to say. Of course, it's a one summary solution, like, for all sorts of companies. Each company is unique, and sometimes you do have competitors in Europe. Sometimes you have your trade partners in Europe who might be supportive to you. And we thought we will just quickly make an overview of what FTI can offer.
Yes, absolutely. Just in a couple of words, really to add what already Kirsten mentioned, in terms of here in Brussels, we are part of a strategic communications team. So everything coming from public government affairs relations, but also crisis management. So in terms of stressful moments for the business, looking also at the reputational side of things, whether it's engagement with stakeholders, media engagement, mapping, but also anything related to digital. We live in a digital world. A lot of advocacy here in Brussels, whether it's Platform X or LinkedIn, it's also very relevant. Whereas I understood from Olga that, for example, Facebook is more being used in Ukraine, whereas Facebook is non-existent here in Brussels in terms of EU advocacy. So there are elements looking also, for example, people in transformation is another element, for companies undergoing change or change of management as well. But predominantly, to summarize in 2 sentences, here in Brussels, everything related to the EU institutions, the political and the policy process, and the reputation of companies, increasing their presence, looking at different tactics, at the networks, making its relevance to the political agenda, while also using the context and the specificality of 27 member states. This is just, from policy analysis to crisis to executive briefings, we're looking at the full spectrum. I will not go through that in detail, but perhaps just to, also to summarize and come back to the point of the main differentiator. Yes, we are part of the strategic communication segment at the last box on the right, but we as FTI have a business advisory capacity. We have economists in-house. We work also in economic studies, so we can help as well.
Let me give you an example. One part of the FTI, which is based out of Paris, it's called Compass Lexicon, is now working on setting up Ukrainian ETS system in collaboration with Ernst & Young, and it's done because Ministry of Ecology requested it, and the World Bank will be sponsoring it. So we will be doing basically the drafting of law for Ukraine on that issue. So that is to say, because Ministry of Ecology understands how complex is the task of ETS being, established within the framework of Ukrainian legislation. It has to be in compliance with the European standards and directives. One of the, economic consulting divisions of FTI will be working on it.
And that's in particular case also relevant to Ukraine. Another example, just to give you also understanding, we've been working for hydrogen is very high on the agenda. There are targets that Europe wants to meet. We're working with a company from actually South Africa that is looking to expanding its presence to Europe and looking to exporting hydrogen. So there is also, from an economic perspective, so we help analyzing that, but also translating the outcome of the economic study into political and policy messages and asks that then we, in our engagement here in Brussels, where legislation will be further set in the next 5 years on hydrogen imports. So that's also showcasing a collaboration between different sectors, different segments of FTI, to make sure there's change in the direction that the industry or the particular company would like to accomplish. Yeah, I think that's it.
That would be it for us. If you have any questions additional to what we discussed.
Yes, Olga Mateos, thank you very much. My question would be, from your perspective, how do you forecast the changes in the Parliament and in the European Commission after the elections? Do you expect any drastic changes in their policies, apart from Hungary being taking the leader's role for the next half of the year?
Yeah, good question. So yes, we expect change. Looking also at where we are geopolitically, where Europe is geopolitically, the next 5 years will be about making sure that Europe as a continent is a powerhouse in terms of manufacturing. So making sure that industry stays in Europe, that there are jobs at a competitive price as well, and products available. Making also sure that the pressures from other areas, like from China, from the US, in terms of trade relationships, to withstand that. So that's definitely will be a guiding principle, making sure that industry in Europe is strong and has a role to play. At the same time, the Kirsten mentioned on the environmental agenda, yes, sustainability will continue in the discussions around the Green Deal, and actually how to implement that, how to make it practical, because for now it was where all ideas and legislation has been passed. Now it's about implementation. So how will all these rules going to be implemented and work together, or not work together, which then would need to be addressed later on in terms of reviewing the legislation. And the third point, very, very obvious, rebuilding also the defense capabilities of Europe as such. That's another key milestone. We can expect a dedicated commissioner, so the highest political support that would be responsible for ensuring that there's a European defense industry. To making sure there's financial support systems in place as well, or easing ways of business. And also linked to the other sectors, if there's a strong defense industry, there's also a lot of energy required. Where do we get the energy from? So it's interlinked. But to summarize, more defense sector, sustainability to continue, but industrial policy, making sure that business stays and invests in Europe. I would say these are the 3 principles for the next 5 years.
And with that in mind, I'd like to reframe your question: where are Ukraine and Ukrainian companies in all of this? And I have an idea which I try to discuss with some of the Ukrainian companies, that we do have right now a momentum with a new commission, with a new stream of politicians coming to the parliament to reposition Ukraine For example, if we take steel making, it used to be Ukrainian steel was perceived as, kind of a competitor to European steel. How do we make Ukrainian steel European steel? And I, keep saying, like, because of what is happening in Ukraine, because of so many people willing to help Ukraine, how do we twist their brains and to say Ukrainian steel is European steel? Ukrainian agro production is European agro production. We are candidate. We are already implementing some of the very strict measures, even painful for some of the European companies. But this is a communication approach I would take right now for most of the companies coming from Ukraine, to say, we are here, we are with you, we appreciate your help, we know your rules, we try to comply to the best point we can. Here is where we need help. And there, in particular, if you want to get funding from this Ukrainian facility, investment framework, that's one approach. If you want to expand your business in Europe, that's another approach. If you want European politicians to understand the reasons why Ukraine should postpone slightly some of the ecological or sustainability reporting demands, also we have to explain why, what are our limitations. So I'd say with the next commission, we need to find the right wording for them to embrace Ukraine as part of Europe, truly in economic sense.
Thank you. And maybe last question from my side. Do you have any statistics of your efficiency as a company in terms of supporting and helping your clients? I mean, what is the success rate?
Very good question, Svetlana. So we're not in a scientific business. I need to say from the very beginning, we're looking at at projects or looking at assignments. It needs to be tailored to what we define as success as well. So normally at the beginning of the project, a new project, we would sit down with the client. We would have, understand what do they see, what are the issues that they're facing, whether it's internally or externally. What are the milestones? Is there any major development that we should be aware of that we need to factor into our advocacy activities? Making the point also, this is a long-term commitment, as Olga mentioned. It requires several tactics, whether it's meetings directly or indirectly, whether it's engagement through trade associations or yourself. This will take all into account at the beginning, and we try to define how success would look like. So when defining how success could look like, it is, on one hand, quantitative and qualitative. So on the quantitative, let's say there's a media program, and we would like to speak, make sure that the CEO of a company, speaks to, the leading Brussels media landscape, for example. So this could be quantitative. Of course, we cannot promise the exact outcome, the result, but we will be working towards that goal. On the qualitative side, for example, and I think that the example of Olga mentioned about gas storage, that is also a qualitative example in terms of, through different tactics, through different activities, seeing change or messages that you bring to the table. You seeing reflected, whether it's in events or whether it's by other statements or, for example, written questions by MEPs, that you see that the points you've been making, you see reflected in some of the public or political discussions. That we could see, for example, as a qualitative metrics. So there's not an easy or scientific direct answer. It again depends also on the remit, on the scope of the engagement, but that will be part of the discussion of the kickoff discussion with a new client. How do we see success and how we would measure it? What would be the different steps to achieve that?
No questions, so one more question, and that's it from my side. Do you refuse to take the cases from clients? And what are the reasons if you refuse?
Yeah, so maybe, so we given we're a global company, given we're also on the New York Stock Exchange, so we need to have very strict compliance measures in place. We have this conflict check mechanism, so there's a group of people, of experts within the company, that any new potential project needs to be checked in terms of what would be the scope, in terms of for whom are we going to be working, and what would be the desired outcome. So there's an internal conflict check mechanism. On the other side, we have also this ethical and risk body. So there's another layer. For example, a direct example is any assignments related to Saudi Arabia, for example, that would require additional measures. Russia is a special case because we do not work for Russia as such. That's been a company decision from the very top, from the very beginning. So by default, any Russian or any Russia-related assignments will be rejected. But example like Saudi Arabia, that would require an additional 2 layers of discussions and assessments, often going to the boards sitting in New York, looking at what could be the also reputational challenge for a company as ours on representing a potential client.
I see. Colleagues, thank you very much. If someone has any questions, if not, please feel free, as Kirsten mentioned, to send them via email to us. Olga, Mateusz, thank you very much for your presentation and for the discussion, very interesting discussion we had. We are looking forward to our further workshops and meetings over different topics. We hope we have a number of them already scheduled, that maybe some other will appear. And colleagues, the audience, we will circulate the presentation of FTI afterwards. So please feel free to contact us, and then we will facilitate the dialogue with the company.
Thank you so much.
And have a great Friday.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.